Good afternoon. I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm honored to be here with my colleagues, Senator John McCain, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Richard Burr, the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and Senator Lindsey Graham, who is also a very active member of both the Senate Armed Services Committee and is the chair of the Appropriations on Foreign Aid within the Appropriations Committee. Today we have come here to talk about a very important issue. The primary purpose of our government, of course, is to keep the American people safe, and we have not seen a detention and interrogation policy from this administration that ensures that those we have captured on the battlefield and those who are terrorists who have sought to do harm to us and our allies are being detained and fully interrogated. And this, unfortunately, our prayers go out to all those who are victims in Paris, but we have seen time and time and again, it's so important that when we capture a terrorist or anyone who is working with them, that we ensure that we get the maximum amount of information to protect our country and to keep not only America but our allies safe. Today, I want to talk about what the administration has been doing to fulfill really a campaign promise made by the president, which was to close Guantanamo. And it's one thing to make a campaign promise, but if you look at the security situation that we're facing around the world right now, now is not the time to be emptying Guantanamo with no plan for how and where these individuals are going to go, no assurances of security of those who have been released. And frankly, what we have seen since May is the administration has released 27 detainees from Guantanamo Bay. Last month alone, the administration transferred 15 detainees out of Guantanamo. And who are these individuals? Well, one of the problems we're facing is that the administration has not been fully transparent with the American people about who is being released and what conditions, once they're being released, are they being held or not held in. And so one of the things our legislation will do today is, while respecting sources and methods and classification where necessary to protect our intelligence, is more transparency to understand how the individuals who are being held at Guantanamo are designated, what risks they present to us, and when they are transferred, are they transferring high-risk individuals. In May, we saw the administration transfer the Taliban 5 to Qatar, and we know the background of those individuals. One of them was reported to be the Taliban Deputy Defense Minister, senior-most commander in northern Afghanistan, who was involved with the massacre of hundreds of ethnic minorities. Another was reported to be the Taliban's chief of communications. Another was said to be directly associated with Osama bin Laden. And while another was reported to be the former deputy head of the Taliban intelligence. On November 5th, the Obama administration released a detainee to Kuwait who was reportedly arrested for connections to al-Qaeda and affiliated with one of the most infamous jihadi recruiters in the United Kingdom. On November 20th, President Obama released 5 detainees to Slovakia and Georgia. These detainees the administration transferred reportedly included members of al-Qaeda or affiliated groups who participated in al-Qaeda operations both in and out of Afghanistan. One of these terrorists was reportedly assessed by the Defense Intelligence Agency as among the top 52 enemy combatants posing a significant threat of re-engaging in terrorism. On December 7th, President Obama transferred 6 detainees to Uruguay. Some of these former detainees are reported to have links to al-Qaeda, including ties to a key al-Qaeda facilitator and senior explosives trainer, whose information was found on the hard drive of the self-proclaimed mastermind of the September 11th attacks against our country. U.S. officials have stated that these 6 men would be treated as free men. In other words, what we're learning is the people that are being transferred, some of which I've described some of their background to you, that there haven't been conditions placed on the ground, either that they're being detained or that we have assurances that they won't be able to get back in engaging in terrorist acts against us or our allies. On December 20th, President Obama released 4 Afghan detainees who have reportedly been handed over to their families for repatriation. Some of these former detainees are reported to have been previously assessed as high risk for re-engagement to terrorism, have ties to the Taliban, have attacked and planned attacks against U.S. forces. And on December 30th, very close to New Year's Eve, President Obama released 5 detainees to Kazakhstan. One of these detainees reportedly received militant training at Al-Qaeda training camps, was captured at an Al-Qaeda safe house. Another was reportedly captured alongside an Al-Qaeda commander at Tora Bora. So where does this leave us? Where this leaves us is we have seen this administration transferring, to try to fulfill a campaign promise, transferring detainees that have been designated either previously or currently as medium or high risk for re-engagement in terrorism. Those that have been released from Guantanamo by not only this administration, but the Bush administration as well, if you put those numbers together, we have almost a 30% suspected or confirmed cases of re-engagement of terrorism of those who have been released from Guantanamo. This problem is one that we should not be presenting the world as we see it right now. If you think about the security challenges we face around the world, to release high-risk designees of detainees who have a high risk of re-engagement in terrorism or medium risk, we should never have a member of our military or someone who is one of our allies reconfronting one of these individuals who we previously had in custody. We know that 2 of the terrorists that were involved in the Paris terrorist attacks are associated with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the headquarters for Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, of course, is in Yemen. And Yemen is one of the most dangerous countries basically it's the wild, wild west for terrorists right now. And between September and December of 2014 alone, just a 3-month period of time, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula reported and claimed responsibility for 149 attacks in Yemen. Just 6 days ago, a suicide bomber killed more than 50 people at a police academy in Yemen's capital. I have a 10-page list of terrorist attacks, violence, and prison breaks from Yemen. Almost 5 of those pages have just occurred in January of this year. So our legislation is straightforward. The administration has not presented a plan that can assure the safety and security of of the American people when detainees who have been designated medium or high risk for re-engagement in terrorism are released. And so our legislation would put a moratorium on the transfer of these medium and high risk detainees. Because of the security situation we're facing around the world, because of the 30% re-engagement rate of those who are suspected or confirmed of re-engaging in terrorism, it's clear that we need a timeout so that we do not reconfront the terrorists that we had captured and are currently in Guantanamo. Our legislation would also prohibit for 2 years the transfer of any Guantanamo detainees to Yemen. And in fact, this is an important provision because of all the attacks I told you that have occurred in Yemen, the connections we know to Yemen with the recent events in Paris. The last thing we should be doing is transferring detainees from Guantanamo to a country like Yemen. And why is this important? The administration had lifted the ban on transfers to Yemen, and in fact, of the 127 detainees left at Guantanamo, 81 of them are from Yemen. And we have not received assurances from the administration that they will not seek to transfer anyone to Yemen, despite the wild, wild west nature of what we're facing when it comes to terrorism in Yemen. The legislation also that we'll be introducing will establish and reinstate the standard that was in place in the defense authorization from 2013 for international transfers for detainees. And that standard is a common sense standard that would require the administration to really look at not only the re-engagement rate, but the issue of have the countries that they're thinking of transferring people to actually had cases where people have re-engaged in terrorism. And these standards were common sense standards, and we'll reinstate them in this legislation. Finally, I mentioned transparency. Transparency is so important. To release these Afghan detainees right before New Year's Eve, and for the American people not to understand the risk factors of the detainees that are being transferred, what they have been alleged to have been involved in, and what assurances do we have that once a detainee is transferred by this administration to another country, that that country is actually going to be engaged at all in either holding that detainee or ensuring that those detainees don't get back into the fight and present threats to us, our men and women in uniform, and our allies. And we need transparency so the administration can explain to the American people what they're doing, because I believe that the American people have a right to know when dangerous terrorists are transferred from Guantanamo, where they're going, and what are the conditions upon which they are going there to ensure that they don't get back in the battle and harm us or our allies. With that, I'm honored to introduce the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, John McCain.
Well, I want to thank Senator Ayotte for her in-depth description of the legislation which we intend to take up in the Senate Armed Services Committee, by the way. And our leadership is important in our involvement. I'd also like to point out that Senator Burr, in his role on the Intelligence Committee for many years, has been tracking this issue as well. And Senator Lindsey Graham has spent the last 13 years serving his active duty in either Iraq or Afghanistan, visiting the areas of detention and deeply involved in this whole issue of treatment of detainees, whether it be overseas or whether it be in Guantanamo. I think there's two indisputable facts here. One, the attack in Paris indicated the degree in which terrorists are being trained and sent back to commit acts of terror. It is obvious that at least one and possibly both of these individuals' brothers had received training in Yemen, and it's very obvious that this was part of a plot, not just a, quote, lone wolf activity, as some may have wanted to attribute it to. I think the other fact is that the head of British intelligence gave a speech, an unusual act for MI5, saying that they are now attacks being planned on the United States of America and Great Britain. So why is that so important? It's important because we know for a fact that roughly 30% of those who have been released have re-entered the fight, and usually at a very high level, because it's a badge of honor to have been an inmate at Guantanamo Bay. So instead, we're going to continue to release batches of prisoners, according to this administration, with no plan, and the extreme likelihood that approximately 1 out of every 3 of them will re-enter the fight. We owe the men and women who are serving in the military better protection than that. So I strongly support Senator Ayotte's legislation. If the administration, for the first time in 6 years, can come over with a plan as to how to judge and to retain or to bring to the United States of America under certain circumstances these detainees, I am open to do so. I am open to do so. But in over 6 years, this administration has never presented to the Congress of the United States a concrete or coherent plan as to handle the detainee issue. And now we are faced with New Year's Eve releases of people, many of whom have been judged by objective panels as too dangerous to be released. Senator Burr.
John, thank you. Kelly, Lindsey. I'm here to enthusiastically support this initiative. I think it's safe to say that the detainees that are the subject of release today are either dangerous or the most dangerous that have existed at that facility. Now, you might ask, why is the chairman of the Intelligence Committee so interested to support this legislation and to be at this press conference? It's because it's the intelligence community that's charged to try to track terrorism around the world. The intent is to keep the American people safe. It's to work not only with our global partners, but it's to work with those sources that we have. And as we can all see in Paris, as you glean information from a terrorist act, our ability to take that information that we learn. Where did they go? Who did they meet with? Who did they talk to? Who did they call? And to run that against any potential sources that we have. That source can be electronic, it can be phone numbers. That source can also be individuals that we currently have detained. When we look at Paris and we see it in real time, yet we hear that Saeed may have visited Yemen in 2011 before the unfortunate death of Anwar al-Awlaki, we realize that anybody that might be at Guantanamo or anywhere in the world that has knowledge and texture of Yemen in 2011 is a legitimate source for us to go to and to run the names of the brothers and to see if there was talk of an operation. Let me just say that at a time that the administration suggests that Al-Qaeda has been decimated, at a minimum, why would we begin to rebuild Al-Qaeda by releasing predominantly Al-Qaeda former radicals? Now, I don't think that there's a person up in front of this podium that believes that Al-Qaeda has been decimated. And given that terrorism is fresh on the national front and remains a #1 concern of us domestically, why would we continue to fuel with the experience and, more importantly, the intent that we know exists from detainees at Guantanamo by potentially filling the ranks of the Al-Qaeda structure, regardless of what we might call them, the Arabian Peninsula, core Al-Qaeda, Khorasan, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb. I look at it and I see one group. They're terrorists. And there is a war on that terrorist intent. Why we would replenish them, why we wouldn't take the time to hold these individuals until we're at a better point or we know a little bit more is beyond me. But if the administration requires legislation to do it, I'm enthusiastically supportive of the effort of these members of the United States Senate and, more importantly, the Congress of the United States. Senator Graham?
I think Senator Ayotte described it very well. A timeout is needed based on the circumstances that exist throughout the world. Not only is Al-Qaeda not decimated, it's coming back in many forms. The head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen is also the general manager for global operations of Al-Qaeda Corps. They're cross-pollinating. So Richard probably knows the details better than anyone here. But Paris, what did we learn from Paris? One of the guys had already served time in jail for terrorism. Recidivism is a problem throughout the world. The law enforcement model is not going to work. President Obama is criminalizing the war. When we capture a high-value target, they should be held as an enemy combatant under the law of war for intelligence gathering purposes, and you can do that as long as necessary. Due process does exist. Every detainee at Guantanamo Bay is entitled to go before a federal judge, and the government has to make the case that you are in fact associated with one of the groups that allow you to be held as an enemy combatant. I believe in due process. I've been a military lawyer for 32 years. This is a war without end. You don't release prisoners until the war is over, usually. I would argue the war is, in many ways, just starting. So the legislation is to create a moratorium until we can get a better handle on what's going on throughout the world. Syria, Iraq, and Yemen are becoming platforms to attack America. And the predominant number, the majority of people held at Guantanamo Bay now come from Yemen. So the idea of having a timeout until we can get a handle on this makes perfect sense. The circumstances dictate that we do something in Congress. We can no longer sit on the sidelines and watch the jail be emptied. I have never opposed bringing people into America. If you have a maximum security prison run by the military that is away from population centers and use the law of war detention model. The president has never come up with a plan to do that. What I vehemently oppose is emptying the jail. It's one thing to move the prisoners from one location to another. It's another thing to let them out of jail. The last thought about Paris. These brothers were on watch list. They were being monitored by the French government, and they were patient, and they waited till the monitoring was over. They went to Yemen in 2010 and 11, apparently received training in Syria and some funds. So the idea that you can release these people and watch them has a hole in it. The Paris experience tells us that recidivism is a problem when it comes to jihadists, and monitoring has its limitations. For the next 2 years, I think America would be wise if we came together as a nation and said, those at Guantanamo Bay that have had due process, that have been determined to be jihadists, should be held for 2 more years until we can fix this problem, or at least get a grip on it. To the administration, you own what you have done. You're owning the problems you're creating throughout the world by turning the war into a crime. In over 2 years, we have not held anybody as an enemy combatant under the law of war. We read every high-value target their Miranda rights within hours or days of capturing. I'm against waterboarding. That's an extreme that should be taken off the table. We've gone to another extreme. We're turning the war into a crime and we're losing valuable intelligence. To my colleagues in the Senate, make yourself informed. Spend time looking at the evidence. Take this serious, because the decisions we make on this legislation literally are life and death. The only reason most of these people have not planned another 9/11 at Guantanamo Bay is because they've been in jail. You let them out of jail, they're going to be on the ground floor planning another 9/11.
Questions?
When do you expect to take this bill out of Senate Armed Services, and is there any support on the House side for this legislation?
There is support on the House side. I've had conversations with Chairman Thornberry, and we will be. I haven't really discussed exactly when. We need to take the temperature of the other members of the committee and all of that, but we will be assessing taking it up as a separate piece of legislation. We just can't wait as long as the normal process of the NDAA.
Sure. Senator McCain, I don't think it's surprising that any of your colleagues are supporting this legislation. As you yourself just last month said that you're there to support the administration's effort to close Guantanamo Bay. The administration says legislation like this is going to ensure that they're not able to close it.
Well, in 2009, then White House counsel came to my office and met with me and Senator Graham. He said, we want to work on releasing and closing down Guantanamo. I said, great, give us a plan. Send us a plan so that we can then turn it into legislation or endorse it or not. It's now been 6 years. Tell me what the plan is. There has never been one. Meanwhile, the way that they have been releasing is about 30% have re-entered the fight. Now, somewhere, hopefully, in the administration's mind, they might consider the fact that despite the president's campaign pledge, they're putting the lives of Americans in danger. If you're going to release someone, if someone commits murder and you release them out into the population without any penalty, it's very likely they're going to commit another murder. The American people would never stand for us releasing people who are guilty of crimes out in the population. And so what we're doing here is because of the preponderance and overriding concern of fulfilling the president's campaign promise, they have never come with a plan. Senator Graham just said, and I'm saying, and Senator Ayotte are saying, if you will come forward with a plan so that we can keep those who are judged by an objective commission as too dangerous to be released, and have a plan for addressing those individuals, then we were not only open but eager to have that plan. They have not provided it.
Can I also add that they never provided a plan when the Democrat Party was in charge of the Congress. So it's been a long time. And here we are with the security situation around the world that, unfortunately, in light of recent events, no one can argue that the dynamics out there aren't challenging, dangerous. We've seen resurgence of al-Qaeda, and yet no plan, and we have people there who are directly connected with al-Qaeda. What can we do with them? We shouldn't just release them back out into this security setting that they can come back and attack us again.
On 3 separate occasions, I met with the president personally. Once in the Oval Office, just the 2 of us. How could we transfer people from Guantanamo Bay inside the United States and have a legal regime that recognizes we're at war, not fighting a crime? I really do believe it would be a good thing to move the prisoners to another location, but not to empty the jail. None of us have supported emptying the jail. The cold, hard reality is there are people at Guantanamo Bay that are going to die in jail. And here's my message to anybody joining al-Qaeda or an affiliated group. You do so at your own peril. You can get killed by a drone, you can get killed in a variety of ways. If you get captured, you can spend the rest of your life in jail. Every nation at war with an enemy has the right to hold enemy prisoners off the battlefield as long as they're a threat. Here's the more compelling analysis. The president does not appreciate how the world is devolving into chaos. To release these prisoners, given what's going on throughout the world, to me is a disconnect between reality on the ground and a campaign promise. Bush made a lot of mistakes and he adjusted. This president is doubling down. He is playing in his own mind like the war is over. Killing bin Laden did not end the war. It created a new phase in the war. So the most disturbing thing to me about this administration is not that he just didn't send somebody to Paris when the whole world was trying to send a message, but he is the most charitable thing I can say about President Obama when it comes to al-Qaeda and radical Islam. He is unfocused. To release prisoners, the hardest of the hard, at this stage in the war shows that you're unfocused as Commander-in-Chief as to the threats we face. We're not unfocused in Congress.
Could I also add, in terms of this idea on closing Guantanamo, he hasn't made his case to the American people, because this has been, both sides of the aisle have not supported this. So when you've had mixed government, you've had Democrats in charge, this has not happened. So he's got to make that case as well.
Senator McCain, or both of you, is this bill a response, a direct response to the Paris attacks, or have you been working on this for a long time? And secondly, what do you say to the folks who say that the GTMO is a symbol that helps radicalize people who want to get America home?
Well, let me just be clear. I've been working on this for a long time. This is something that I had worked on in the defense authorization on the Yemen provision, that I actually had offered a provision in committee. And so while in light of the events that have happened in Paris, those events, I think, demonstrate the threats that we face and the fact that we don't want to put dangerous terrorists back in to give them an opportunity to attack us again. Certainly this is something I've been working on for a long time. And I'll tell you what I think a stain is. I think it's a stain that any of our men and women in uniform should ever have to be confronted again by someone we had captured who was a terrorist, and then have to put themselves at risk to recapture that individual. That's a stain, and I don't think that they should have to put up with that.
Frankly, I don't think that the issue of Guantanamo radicalizes radicals. I think they have plenty of reasons in their perverted, distorted view of attacking the United States of America besides the issue of Guantanamo. In fact, if they think that there's a likelihood that if they commit these acts of terror and then have the prospect or likelihood of being released, it may incentivize them to take greater risks. Yes, sir.
Senator McCain, can I ask you a question on a different topic?
Anything.
So you ran for president in 2000 and 2000.
You had to bring that up, didn't you? Yeah, Jesus.
So you say that Mitt Romney, who ran in 8, 12,
Yes.
now he's thinking about 16. Is that a good idea?
I think that Mitt Romney is a person who's dedicated to serving the country. I think he is a fine and decent American. I think he has a reservoir of support, and I certainly respect any decision that he might make. I'm a great admirer of Mitt Romney's. My illegitimate son, Lindsey Graham, is exploring that option, and so I am strongly encouraging Senator Lindsey Graham, particularly with the world the way it is today. No one understands the world today the way that Lindsey Graham does, in my view. Did you want to follow up? Go ahead.
In 2018, we gave you a second look. Is it possible just for someone to give, or for voters to give Mitt Romney a third look, you think?
Yeah, you know, I don't know, but I think that one of the rationale that Governor Romney is using, and I think it's very legitimate, is that a major factor in his debates was the issue of foreign policy. Obviously, the picture of the world that Barack Obama painted in those debates, Osama bin Laden is dead, Al-Qaeda core is decimated, on and on. The President of the United States painted a view of the world which has turned out to be patently false and more dangerous. So I think that Mitt Romney and his advisors will take in consideration whether a third attempt would be viable or not. I just think that he would be viable, and I think he's a very outstanding person. Go ahead.
Sure. New Hampshire, you talked to Mitt Romney.
Well, New
May I
Hampshire
mention
does
the
have
most
that.
the most popular Republican every 4 years in America is right here.
Well, you know, I guess I would echo what Senator McCain said. Certainly, Mitt Romney, obviously, he does have a reservoir of goodwill. I think left from his prior run, he's someone who, last time, if you look at the debates, even the comments that he was castigated on with regard to Russia, in light of what's happened in Ukraine, I think he's been vindicated in many ways on some of the things that he said about foreign policy. And he ran last time with a resume of someone who understands how to fix things and get things done. And we obviously continue to need that here in Washington. So I think he's going to be a strong candidate. But, you know, I think we're going to have a very vigorous field here, as you've seen, you know, with obviously Governor Bush exploring as well, a number of our colleagues in the Senate, too. And we want them all to come to New Hampshire and make sure that they meet the people of New Hampshire and spend a lot of time with folks in the Granite State, because we expect that.
Would you support Romney again?
I certainly have a lot of respect. I think he hasn't decided yet, and so I'm looking forward to talking to each of the candidates. And most importantly, I want them to talk to my constituents and have to answer the tough questions that they will ask them.
I am looking forward to the assiduous courting of Senator Ayotte by various potential candidates. Yes.
Two quick questions. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Martin Dempsey, said on Sunday that he supports closing Guantanamo. He said it's in the national interest. He called it a psychological scar. Is this essentially you guys, you senators, saying that you know better than the Pentagon on this issue?
If you look at General Dempsey's comments that he has made before the Senate Armed Services Committee, time after time, where he has made statements that are not only wrong but ridiculous. For example, the fall of Bashar Assad is inevitable. That was two and a half years ago, including his steadfast objection to assisting the Free Syrian Army, including his apparent objection to providing weapons for the Ukrainians to defend themselves. I don't believe that, certainly not with this individual, that General Dempsey's opinion carries any weight whatsoever, because he obviously blatantly ignores, and it's sad to say, the fact that so many of these individuals that have been released are now putting the men and women under his command's lives in danger. To me, that's really, really unfortunate.
Sorry to clarify, so you're saying that General Dempsey is wrong on this?
Of course he's wrong.
He doesn't have the national security expertise?
He is wrong on this.
He's been.
He's
I
wrong
just
on this.
I just gave you a litany, and I can give you plenty more of the issues of which he's been wrong. This is just another one.
And another question is, you and Senator Graham have both said that you would support, under certain circumstances, detainees being transferred to the U.S., but this legislation puts a 2-year ban on any transfer to the U.S.
Until they
as well
come
as
up, until they come up with a plan. Until they come up with a plan, which they haven't for over 6 years. Perhaps you missed the beginning of my remarks. Maybe go back and look at my opening remarks.
Have a plan, but this legislation would ban it for 2 years. So if this legislation
We can
passes-
repeal it. We can repeal the legislation in a New York minute if he comes up with a plan.
And I would argue that this just states current policy, because right now, the defense authorization prohibits transfers for a year, at least till the end of December. So this legislation reflects current policy and has been the policy, since the president essentially has been in office. And so, yet he knows what the policy's been. It's been voted on a bipartisan basis, and yet we still haven't seen any plan from him. So here where we are.
How many detainees that are left there are medium to high risk detainees?
The overwhelming majority are medium or high risk that are left, because the reality is the 127 that are left, they reflect some of the most dangerous individuals who, some of whom we are holding under law of war detention, and of concerns that if we release them back, that obviously that they will re-engage. And of those 127, as I said earlier, 81 of them are from Yemen, and that's why this Yemen piece is very, very important, that this be included in the legislation.
Last question. Last question.
Chairman, thank you. What sort of plan would you accept from the administration in order to close?
Just as Senator Graham described it. Good. Yeah. Thank you.